And I'll be able to present a couple of basic ideas. So the first one, just to start this off. So the first one is aggregation, right? So that you have them, you know you have all of the, you have your network, and we're just going to sort of start to sort of say that these ones are parts of groups. Right, so Ward's method, right, so we've used this ourselves. So we're going to get the distances between pairs, whatever makes sense for this network, and it could be the shortest distance. And then we're going to sequentially just sort of add links between nodes based on closeness. Right? I mean, there's already links in them, but we're going to start to sort of just group them together. Eventually, right, as you go through this whole thing, everyone's connected to everyone else. So there's the actual network, and then there's a thing over here, which will be whether they're part of the same teams, right, which is another kind of network. And it could be that we don't necessarily have a network over here. We may have just measures of distance between them. It could be more general than that, right? So we did this for shapes of stories in games, right? So sports games, like the actual shapes of them. You can just measure the distance between the shapes. So clusterings emerge, and then clusters inside of clusters and so on. So we'll get this modularity idea, right? So there'll be a hierarchy. There's sort of there'll be these groups, and then they may be part of a bigger group, and that's the same thing over here, and they're part of a bigger group and so on. That happened, we expect this to pop out, right? Yeah, as I say, the Australian rules thing, which is football, the great football. All right, so this is powerful. People use this all the time, and that's a good thing. So there's sort of early on with complex networks, they sort of discarded that approach. Just sort of say they're good at finding cores of well-connected nodes, but fail to cope with the peripheral ones, right? So the idea is, how do they'll find these as groups, but then sort of maybe struggle to kind of assign which group these ones are part of. That was the sort of general criticism. So it works well, but you can take a different approach. And so this is the opposite things. You start with the network and then start to mess with it, right? So right, we're going to recursively, so we're going to start with the whole thing and then recursively dig into it and find the sort of, so it's all connected to start with. We want to somehow sort of just slowly erode the network until we see, there are two big groups. So some ways of kind of eroding the edges. Right, you could imagine, the physical landscape thing would be, here's a sea, and as we lower it down, we start to see, mountains kind of pop out, islands pop out, and we'll say, that's a structure and structure. And of course, once we drain it all out, then everything's connected. So there's something in between that we're trying to find. Okay, this is Michelle Gervin, who I mentioned before, and Newman, so that's got 4,000 or 5,000 citations. More things, yes, many, many more things. Newman and Gervin again. One of those was in PNAS, yes, right. Anyway, so here's the basic idea, and I really can just sort of say this. We've talked about betweenness, right? So we look at edge betweenness. So we're going to take this whole network and we measure edge betweenness and rank the edges by their betweenness values, and then we start to then we take out the most connected one. So this is the idea. So it takes a little while, right? This is a bit of a complicated thing, but we're going to measure the betweenness of all of these edges for this whole thing, find the one that's got the highest betweenness, and then cut it. Okay, all right, we're going to cut, yes. In this, this is an undirected. The basic thing you start with is that. And then, but you can do it with weighted ones, at least, which would make it, slower, but you could certainly do the same kind of thing. Imagine these are cities and you're driving between them and people really commute a lot from these two places. But the assumption for the betweenness thing is that every node wants to go to every other node. They're all sending messages, which obviously functionally isn't true. But that's a big piece here. All right, so you cut one of these edges, and then you have to measure the whole betweenness again, because you might, you could certainly have this circumstance where you've got two big things, there's a connection between them like this, and then maybe there's this other one here, And if you do the shortest path between every node and every node, this one gets a huge betweenness. But this doesn't so much, because it's more roundabout and it would take longer and so on. But if you cut this edge out now, suddenly all the load will go here. So you can't, so you actually have to you have to cut it and then measure the betweenness again. You have to recompute everything again. Which your system, a real system, if it's a power system, will do for you and explode, right? Okay, so that's clearly then going to take a while, but that's the idea. So we're going to compute the edge betweenness, remove the one with the highest one, recompute it, keep doing this. And then what you do is you record when components start to appear as a function of the number of edges removed, right? So at some point, that example that I just showed you is going to break. Huh. I don't know why that's there. Logo. Right? At some point, these will be removed, and these will be removed, and this one will be removed, probably before any of these internal ones. And you'll start to see your little thing will show 3. And eventually you'll start to, break these up as well. But they might not be meaningful. And eventually you'll remove all the edges, right? So somewhere in between the original one and the completely broken up one, there's a sense that you've gotten to some idea of the modularity of this thing. It may be a couple of peaks. You may see, there are 3 big groups, but then there are sort of 4 groups within them. So you want to be able to get that. And that's this idea here. So this is going down here is the number of edges removed, just a linear scale. And at this point, right, there are 4 components that have emerged. And what we need is some measure here to sort of say, this is actually a pretty decent modular thing. So that's the piece we'll get to. There's a lot of this, right? So you start with everything connected, here's your big blob, this is your network, and then this idea of breaking it down into its nodes. And it may be, as I said, that you want this one, and then this is also important. There are lots of real-world examples you can play around with, like football, like conference football, or sports in general, like they can replace with whom, and so on, so that sort of thing. Or airline networks, and so on and so on. Things where we really do know the structure, and you need to fit in your little machine and see that it does the right thing. So that's just a start on this piece. As I said, you have to recompute the betweenness, and then this is really what we want to do. So we'll talk about this piece next, but this is modularity measure is what we want. Like how well does this sort of saying that there are these 3 modules compared to just everything being randomly wired up? Is this something that's really different to a random version, as we often do? Okay, so that's a start to that. Ooh, yeah. Okay, I'll clean that up. All right. Office hours are next. You're free to go. Thank you. Okay.